Some people you never forget, even when you wish you could. I'm Dale, and I've been operating the crematory at Hillside Memorial for 12 years now. It's steady work, respectful, quiet, necessary. Most days pass without much conversation. Families come to collect their loved ones. I hand over the urns with a few gentle words, and that's the end of it. Clean, professional, final. But then there was Margaret. She first appeared on a Tuesday in March, wearing a navy coat that had seen better years and carrying a worn leather purse. Average height, gray hair pulled back neat, maybe 65 or 70. The kind of woman who'd blend into any grocery store line. She approached my desk with the paperwork for Thomas Henley, claimed he was her brother. Such a peaceful service, she said, accepting the urn. Her voice was soft, practiced. Thomas would have appreciated the flowers. I nodded, made the appropriate notes. Thomas Henley had been unclaimed for 3 months. No family had come forward. No friends. The state would have handled his disposal eventually. It felt good that someone cared enough to give him proper rest. The following Tuesday, Margaret returned, this time for Eleanor Vasquez. Her sister, she explained, same soft tone. Eleanor had also been sitting unclaimed for months, another forgotten soul. Margaret signed the papers, took the urn, offered the same comment about peaceful services and flowers. By the third Tuesday, I started paying attention. Margaret came every week. Always Tuesday, always around 2 in the afternoon. Different deceased, different claimed relationships. Brother, sister, cousin, aunt. The names changed, but Margaret remained constant. Same navy coat, same worn purse, same gentle demeanor. She knew details about each person that seemed authentic. Remembered their favorite songs, their childhood pets, small, intimate things that only family would know. But something felt off. The unclaimed section was emptying faster than it should, and every single pickup was Margaret. I started checking our records more carefully. None of the deceased she claimed had any documentation linking them to a Margaret anything. No emergency contacts, no family trees, no previous inquiries. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Linda. She shrugged it off. Maybe she's just a good Samaritan, she said. Some people feel called to care for the forgotten. Nothing wrong with giving these folks a proper send-off. That might have been the end of it, except for the security cameras. I started reviewing the footage from Margaret's visits, just to satisfy my own curiosity. The timestamp showed her arriving, approaching my desk, conducting her business, leaving with an urn. Normal, routine interactions, but when I watched myself in those recordings, something was wrong. I was handing urns to empty air. The cameras showed me speaking to no one, gesturing at nothing, carefully placing urns on the counter where they'd sit for a moment before disappearing. My mouth moved, having conversations with a person who wasn't there. I looked completely normal, professional even, but utterly alone. I watched 6 weeks of footage. Every Tuesday, the same impossible scene. Me, talking to myself, conducting business with someone the cameras couldn't see, but the urns were definitely gone. The unclaimed storage was nearly empty now. Margaret, or whatever Margaret was, had been systematically collecting every forgotten soul in our facility. The next Tuesday, I waited for her with new eyes. She arrived at exactly 2:07, same as always. Navy coat, leather purse, polite smile. But now I noticed things I'd missed before. Her footsteps made no sound on the tile floor. Her breath didn't fog in the air-conditioned space. When she signed the paperwork, the pen moved, but I couldn't see her fingers gripping it. "I'm here for Robert Chen," she said. "My nephew." Robert had been with us for 5 months. No family, no friends, no one who'd claimed him. Just another number in the unclaimed ledger. "Robert," I repeated, my voice steady, despite the chill spreading through my chest. "Your nephew." "Such a talented pianist," Margaret said, accepting the urn. "He played at my wedding, you know. 1973. Beautiful ceremony." Robert Chen had died at 34. He would have been born decades after Margaret's supposed wedding. I watched her turn and walk toward the exit. Her reflection didn't appear in the glass doors. She passed through them, without pushing them open, dissolving into the afternoon sunlight like morning mist. I stood there holding the clipboard where she'd signed Robert's release papers. The signature was there, clear as day, Margaret Santos, but my hands were shaking, and I couldn't remember watching her write it. That was 6 months ago. Margaret still comes every Tuesday. I've stopped checking the cameras. They only show me having conversations with empty air, and that's harder to watch than her impossible presence. The unclaimed section is completely empty now. She's taken them all. Every forgotten soul who'd been waiting in our cold storage for someone to care. Last week, she started asking about future arrivals. I understand you'll be receiving a Joseph Miller soon, she said. Same soft voice, same navy coat. Terrible accident. No family to speak of. Joseph Miller wouldn't arrive for another 3 days. I don't question her anymore. I don't call my supervisor or check the footage or wonder how she knows things she shouldn't know. I just prepare the paperwork, hand over the urns, and try not to think about where she takes them. Because maybe Linda was right. Maybe Margaret is just a good Samaritan, someone who feels called to care for the forgotten. Maybe it doesn't matter that the cameras can't see her, or that she knows impossible things, or that she walks through glass doors. Maybe some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. But every Tuesday at 2:07, when Margaret appears at my desk with her worn leather purse and gentle smile, I remember that the most comforting lies are often the ones we tell ourselves. And I wonder if someday, when my time comes, whether anyone will remember to collect my ashes or if I'll have to wait for Margaret. The earth remembers things we'd rather forget. I'm Emma, and I've been groundskeeper at Restwood Cemetery for 8 years. It's honest work, maintaining the graves, keeping the grounds clean, helping families find their way to their loved ones. Most plots stay put once they're established. That's kind of the point of a cemetery. Permanence. Rest. Plot 7G broke that rule. I first noticed it on a Monday morning in October. Section 7 is one of the older parts of Restwood, established in 1952, full of weathered headstones and mature oak trees. I was doing routine maintenance clearing, fallen leaves, checking drainage, making sure the sprinkler system hadn't damaged any markers. Plot 7G looked wrong. The earth was disturbed, churned up like someone had been digging. Fresh soil mixed with the older, settled ground. The grass was torn up in patches, revealing dark earth underneath. It looked like excavation work, but I hadn't received any work orders. No exhumations were scheduled. No maintenance requests filed. The headstone read, "Beloved Father and Husband," in weathered granite. But the name had been worn smooth by decades of weather. I couldn't make out who was supposed to be buried there. I checked my records. Plot 7G was listed as occupied since 1968, but the deceased's name was illegible on both the stone and in our oldest logbooks. Water damage? Probably. Happens more often than people think. I reseeded the disturbed area and made a note to follow up with the office about getting a cleaner copy of the burial records. 2 weeks later, 7G was disturbed again. This time it looked like someone had dug down at least 3 feet, then filled it back in hastily. Clods of earth were scattered around the plot, and the new grass seed I'd planted was completely gone. The work was rough, unprofessional. No legitimate excavation crew would have left such a mess. I called the police, thinking we might have grave robbers. Officer Martinez came out, took some photos, filed a report. He said they'd patrol the area more regularly at night, but warned me that cemetery vandalism was hard to catch. Kids, probably, he said. Bored teenagers looking for thrills. But this didn't feel like teenage mischief. The digging was too purposeful, too focused. Someone was looking for something specific. I filled in the hole, reseeded again, and decided to keep a closer eye on Section 7. The third time it happened, I was ready. I'd started making evening rounds, walking the grounds after official hours to watch for suspicious activity. Restwood closes at sunset, but the gates are old and not particularly secure. Someone determined could get in without much trouble. It was a Thursday night in November. When I saw the light, I was walking the main path when I noticed a soft glow coming from Section 7. Not bright, more like candlelight or a small flashlight. I approached carefully, staying in the shadows of the oak trees, expecting to confront teenagers or vandals. Instead, I found a woman kneeling beside Plot 7G. She was maybe 40, wearing a simple dress that looked oddly old-fashioned. Her hair was pinned back neat, and she was digging with her bare hands. No tools, no equipment, just her fingers, clawing at the earth like she was desperate to reach something buried deep. "Ma'am," I called out, stepping into the open. "The cemetery is closed. You need to leave." She looked up at me, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Her expression was heartbreaking, pure grief, raw and unfiltered. "I can't find him," she said. Her voice was soft, broken. "I've been looking, but I can't find him." "Who are you looking for?" I asked, approaching slowly. She didn't seem dangerous, just lost. "My husband," she said, turning back to her digging. "He's supposed to be here. They told me he'd be here, but the ground keeps moving. Every time I get close, everything shifts around." I knelt down beside her. The earth where she'd been digging felt strange, warm to the touch, even though the November air was cold enough to see my breath. The soil seemed to pulse slightly, like it was alive. "What's your husband's name?" I asked. "James," she said. "James Morrison. He died in 1968, car accident. They buried him here, in 7G, but when I come to visit, he's not there. The ground is empty, and then it's full again, and then it's empty. He keeps disappearing." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The records showed Plot 7G had been occupied since 1968, but I'd never been able to read the name on the headstone. "Ma'am," I said gently, "how long have you been coming here?" She stopped digging and looked at me with eyes that seemed older than her face. "Every night," she said, "for 57 years. Every single night. I won't stop until I find him." That's when I realized her dress wasn't old-fashioned. It was old, decades old, but perfectly preserved, like it had been protected from time and weather. Like she had been protected from time and weather. "Mrs. Morrison," I said carefully, "what year do you think it is?" She smiled, sad and distant. 1968, she said. "November 15th, the night after the funeral. I came to say goodbye properly, but he wasn't there. Someone moved him. Someone keeps moving him." I stood up slowly, backing away. The earth around 7G was getting warmer, steam rising from the disturbed soil, despite the cold air. The headstone seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, and for just a moment, I could read the name clearly: James Morrison, beloved husband. When I looked back, the woman was gone, but the digging continued. I could hear it, the soft scraping of fingers against earth, desperate and endless. The sound came from underground, from inside the grave, like someone was trying to dig their way out. I ran. The next morning, Plot 7G was undisturbed. Fresh grass covered the area where the woman had been digging. The headstone was weathered and illegible again, just blank granite with no name visible. I pulled the oldest burial records, going back to the original 1968 paperwork. James Morrison was listed, clear as day. Died November 14th, buried November 15th. Survived by his wife, Margaret Morrison. Margaret Morrison died the same night as the funeral. Car accident, driving home from the cemetery. She was buried 3 plots over, in 7D. That was 6 months ago. Plot 7G still gets disturbed regularly, always at night, always carefully refilled by morning. The earth stays warm year-round now, even in winter. Steam rises from the ground when it rains. I don't work evening shifts anymore, but sometimes, when I'm leaving at sunset, I can hear the digging starting up again. Soft, patient, eternal. Margaret Morrison, still looking for her husband, still unable to find him in earth that won't stay still. And sometimes I wonder if the problem isn't that someone keeps moving James Morrison. Sometimes I wonder if the problem is that she keeps moving herself. Respect for the dead includes respecting their visitors, even the ones who shouldn't be there. I'm Marcus, and I've been funeral director at Peaceful Valley Memorial Home for 15 years. It's a calling that requires patience, compassion, and attention to detail. Families trust us with their most vulnerable moments, and we honor that trust by maintaining dignity in every aspect of our service. Viewing Room 3 has always been our most requested space. Large windows, soft lighting, comfortable seating arranged to encourage quiet reflection. It's where we hold our most intimate services, where families can say their final goodbyes in private. That's where I first met Harold. It was a Thursday evening in September. The Brennan family had requested a private viewing for their father. Just immediate family. Very small gathering. I was making final preparations, adjusting the floral arrangements and ensuring the casket was positioned properly, when I noticed an elderly man sitting in the back row. He was well-dressed in a dark suit that looked expensive but outdated, maybe from the 1970s. Gray hair combed neat, hands folded politely in his lap. He sat perfectly still, looking toward the casket with an expression of quiet respect. "Excuse me, sir," I said, approaching carefully. "I don't believe we've met. Are you family?" He turned toward me with a gentle smile. "Just paying my respects," he said. His voice was soft, refined. "Beautiful service. The flowers are particularly lovely." "Thank you," I said, though the service hadn't actually started yet. "I'm sorry, but this is a private viewing. If you're not immediate family." "Of course," he said, standing gracefully. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'll be going now." He walked past me toward the door, nodding politely. I watched him leave, making a mental note to check with the Brennan family about whether they'd invited any friends or extended family. The viewing went smoothly. The Brennans were grateful for our care, and Mr. Brennan's send-off was everything they'd hoped for. 3 days later, Harold was back. This time we were hosting the Martinez family, viewing for their teenage daughter who died in a car accident. Heartbreaking situation, no parent should have to bury their child. I was being especially attentive, making sure every detail was perfect. Harold was sitting in the same spot, back row, same dark suit, same respectful posture. He was looking toward the casket with that same expression of quiet dignity. "Sir," I said, more firmly this time, "this is a private family service." "Such a tragedy," Harold said, not looking at me. "So young. Her parents must be devastated." The Martinez family hadn't arrived yet. Harold couldn't have known anything about their daughter's age or circumstances. "I need to ask you to leave," I said. "Of course," Harold replied, standing with the same graceful movement. "My apologies." He walked past me again, but this time I followed him to make sure he actually left the building. I watched him exit through the main doors, then disappear into the evening shadows. When I went back to finish preparing the room, everything was perfect except for one detail. The guest book, which had been empty when I left, now contained a single signature: Harold Whitman, friend of the family. I'd never heard the Martinez family mention anyone named Harold. Over the following weeks, Harold became a regular presence. Every viewing in Room 3, always sitting in the back row, always perfectly dressed and respectful. He knew details about the deceased that he couldn't possibly know: their hobbies, their favorite colors, small personal things that only close friends or family would remember. But no one had ever invited him. No family recognized his name. And every time I asked him to leave, he complied politely, walking out the front door like any normal visitor. That's when I started checking the security cameras. Our surveillance system covers all the public areas: viewing rooms, hallways, entrances. The footage should have shown Harold arriving, taking his seat, leaving when asked. Instead, it showed something that made me question my own sanity. The cameras showed me talking to an empty chair. Frame by frame, I watched myself approach the back row, address no one, carry on conversations with air. I looked completely normal, professional, but utterly alone. Harold never appeared in the footage. The guest book signatures appeared on their own, elegant handwriting materializing from nowhere. But I could see him. Every viewing clear as day. We had full conversations. He responded to questions, offered condolences, showed genuine emotion for people he'd never met. I started researching Harold Whitman. The obituaries from 1976 told the story. Harold had been a lifelong resident of our town, worked as a high school principal for 30 years, survived by his wife and 2 daughters, well respected in the community, devoted to helping others. Harold had been buried from Peaceful Valley Memorial Home. His service was held in viewing room 3. The next time I saw him, I knew what to say. "Harold," I said, sitting down beside him instead of asking him to leave. "You've been coming here a long time." 47 years, he said without looking away from the casket. "Ever since my own service. Beautiful room, isn't it? My wife chose it specially." "Why do you stay?" I asked. "Someone should witness," Harold said. "These moments matter when families say goodbye, when love is spoken out loud, when grief becomes acceptance. These are sacred times. They shouldn't happen unobserved." I watched him for a long moment. His profile was clear and solid, completely real to my eyes. "But the families can't see you." "That's not important," Harold said. "What's important is that someone bears witness, that these farewells are honored, that no one grieves alone. And if I ask you to leave?" Harold smiled, the same gentle expression he'd worn during every conversation. "Then I'll go, of course. But I'll come back. This is my purpose now. This is how I serve." That was 8 months ago. Harold still attends every viewing in room 3. He sits quietly, respectfully, witnessing each family's grief with dignity and compassion. The security cameras still show me talking to empty air, but I've stopped watching the footage. I've also stopped asking Harold to leave. Because maybe Harold is right. Maybe these moments do need a witness. Maybe grief shared even with someone the grieving can't see is lighter than grief borne alone. And maybe some kinds of service don't end with death. Last week, Harold did something new. As the Johnsons were finishing their final goodbye to their mother, he stood and walked to the casket. "For just a moment, Mrs. Johnson looked up and smiled, like she'd seen something comforting. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air. Harold nodded, then resumed his seat in the back row. When the family left, I asked him what had happened. "Sometimes," Harold said, "love recognizes love, even when the eyes can't see it." I think about that often now, about love and service and the things that continue beyond death, about witnesses and dignity and the sacred nature of goodbye. And I think about Harold Whitman, still serving his community after 47 years, still ensuring that no one grieves alone in viewing room 3. Some addresses exist only when you need to find them. I'm Sarah, and I've been driving transport for Cornerstone Funeral Services for 6 years. It's specialized work picking up the deceased from hospitals, homes, accident scenes, bringing them to the funeral home with dignity and care. Most of the job is routine, but the night calls are different. Death doesn't keep business hours, and neither do we. The first strange pickup came on a Tuesday in January. Dispatch called at 11:15 p.m. "We've got a pickup at 42 Cedar Lane," Janet said. "Elderly woman, natural causes. Families waiting." I knew the area, older residential neighborhood. Modest homes, quiet streets. But when I arrived at the address, there was nothing there. Just an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and scattered with broken concrete. No house, no family, no body to transport. I called dispatch. "Janet, there's nothing at 42 Cedar Lane." You sure you got the address right? That's what I've got in the system, she said. Family called direct. Said they were waiting. Try knocking. I walked to where the front door should have been. Empty lot, winter grass, street light casting long shadows through bare trees. But as I stood there, confused, I heard a voice. Are you from the funeral home? I turned around. An elderly woman in a nightgown was standing beside my van, looking frail and peaceful. Behind her, I could see the outline of a small house, Victorian style. White paint, porch light glowing warm. Yes, ma'am, I said, though my van had been parked in an empty lot 30 seconds ago. I'm Sarah from Cornerstone. Thank you for coming so quickly, she said. I've been waiting. I helped her into the van, making sure she was comfortable for the ride. She was light as air, barely there at all. When I looked back at the address in my rearview mirror, it was an empty lot again. The paperwork was waiting at the funeral home. Eleanor Chen, age 84, natural causes, family arrangements pending, everything legitimate, everything in order. The second call came 3 weeks later. This time, it was an apartment building on 5th Street that had been demolished 2 years ago. I knew, because I'd driven past the construction site dozens of times, they'd put in a parking lot where the building used to be. But when I arrived at midnight, the building was there. 4 stories, brick facade, iron fire escapes zigzagging up the sides, lights in some windows, the soft glow of people living their lives. A man in his 50s was waiting on the front steps, wearing a bathrobe and slippers. Thank you for coming, he said. Heart attack. Very sudden. My wife is upstairs, too upset to come down. I nodded, helped him into the van. Frank Morrison, the paperwork later showed, died of cardiac arrest. Services pending. Another routine transport, except for the building that shouldn't exist. By the 5th or 6th call, I'd learned not to trust my GPS. The addresses dispatch gave me would lead to empty lots, demolished buildings, sometimes just blank stretches of road. But the deceased were always there, waiting patiently with their impossible homes glowing softly in the darkness behind them. They were never confused or distressed. They thanked me for coming quickly, mentioned family members who were too upset to make the trip themselves, settled into the van like this was the most natural thing in the world. And the paperwork was always perfect. Real names, real death certificates, real services scheduled. These weren't figments of my imagination or bureaucratic errors. They were legitimate calls, legitimate people, legitimate transport requests. They just happened to be coming from places that no longer existed. I started keeping a notebook, recording the addresses and what I found there. 42 Cedar Lane, empty lot, but Eleanor Chen's Victorian house appeared at night. 117 5th Street, demolished apartment building, but Frank Morrison's 4-story brick complex materialized when needed. The pattern was always the same. Dispatch would call with a pickup address that led nowhere during the day, but became real at night when someone needed transport to their final rest. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Kevin, but he just shrugged. Night shift sees weird stuff, he said. Stress? Fatigue? Your mind playing tricks. As long as the paperwork's clean and the families are satisfied, I don't ask too many questions. But the families were never at the funeral home when I arrived. No grieving relatives waiting to make arrangements, no one asking about their loved one's final journey. Just Janet at dispatch, taking information over the phone from people who called from numbers that had been disconnected for years. Last month, I got a call that changed everything. Pick up at 126 Maple Street, dispatch said. Young woman, car accident. Family's very upset. Maple Street was in my old neighborhood, where I'd grown up. 126 had been my best friend Amy's house, but the Hendersons had moved to Florida years ago. New family lived there now. When I arrived, Amy's house looked exactly like it had in high school. Same yellow shutters, same rose bushes by the front porch, same tire swing hanging from the oak tree in the yard. Amy was waiting on the front steps. She was 17 years old, wearing the same clothes she'd died in 23 years ago. Prom dress, corsage, still pinned to her shoulder, hair done up in the elaborate style that had taken her hours to perfect. "Sarah?" she said, looking confused. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to take you to the funeral home," I said, my voice steady despite the chill spreading through my chest. "Oh," Amy said, understanding crossing her face. "Right. The accident. I forgot for a minute." She stood up, smoothing down her dress. "Mom and Dad are too upset to come. You understand." I helped Amy into the van, just like I'd helped Eleanor Chen and Frank Morrison and all the others. She was solid, real, completely present. We talked about high school during the drive, about teachers we'd remembered and friends we'd both lost touch with. "I'm glad it's you," she said as we pulled into Cornerstone's parking lot. I was hoping it would be someone I knew. The next morning, I found Amy's death certificate in the completed paperwork, dated 23 years ago. Car accident on prom night. Services held at Cornerstone Funeral Home. She'd been buried from the same building where I'd just delivered her. I don't question the night calls anymore. When dispatch sends me to addresses that don't exist, I drive there anyway. When houses appear in empty lots and demolished buildings rebuild themselves in the darkness, I accept it as part of the job. Because maybe death isn't as final as we think. Maybe some people need time to understand what's happened to them, need familiar places to exist a little longer so they can make peace with leaving. Maybe my job isn't just transporting bodies. Maybe it's helping souls find their way home, even when home is a place that only exists in memory and need. And maybe that's the most important transport of all. Every crematory keeps perfect records, except for the ones that keep themselves. I'm Ben, and I've been crematory technician at Riverside Memorial for 9 years. It's technical work that requires precision and respect. Families trust us with their loved one's final journey, and we honor that trust with meticulous documentation. Every body that enters our facility gets logged, processed, and accounted for down to the minute. The computerized system never lies. Temperature readings, duration, fuel consumption, everything gets recorded automatically. No human error, no missing paperwork. Clean, professional, complete. That's what made the extra entries so disturbing. I first noticed it on a Wednesday morning in February, reviewing the previous night's logs. The system showed 3 cremations. Margaret Santos at 9:30 p.m., David Kim at 11 p.m., and Robert Harrison at 12:30 a.m. All routine, all properly documented, all corresponding to bodies we'd received and families we'd scheduled. But there was a 4th entry, 3:17 a.m., temperature exactly 1,832 degrees, duration 2 hours and 15 minutes. No name, no intake number, no corresponding paperwork anywhere in our files. The timestamp was precise, the temperature readings consistent, the fuel consumption logged down to the last BTU. According to the computer, we'd cremated someone at 3:17 in the morning, someone who didn't officially exist. I checked with Linda, our supervisor. She reviewed the logs, cross-referenced our intake records, even called the families to verify their loved ones had been processed correctly. "Must be a system glitch," she said. "Computer error. I'll have IT take a look." IT found nothing wrong. The system was functioning perfectly, recording everything accurately. The mystery entry was real data, not a malfunction or corrupted file. "Maybe someone forgot to file the intake paperwork," Linda suggested. "Check with the night attendant." Carlos worked nights, handling after-hours deliveries and emergency situations. He was thorough, reliable, never missed documentation. When I asked him about the 3:17 cremation, he looked confused. "I left at midnight," Carlos said. "Locked up, set the alarms, everything secure. Place was empty when I went home." But the computer disagreed. According to the logs, Carlos had processed a cremation at 3:17 a.m., following all proper protocols, maintaining perfect temperature control throughout the procedure. The next night, it happened again. Same time, 3:17 a.m. Same temperature, exactly 1,832 degrees. Same duration, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Same lack of corresponding paperwork or intake records. I decided to stay late and observe. At 3 a.m., I positioned myself in the control room with a clear view of the crematory equipment. The building was locked, alarms set, security cameras recording. I was alone, watching equipment that should have been idle until morning. At 3:16, the primary furnace activated on its own. The computer screen showed a cremation beginning, temperature climbing steadily toward operating levels. The fuel lines engaged, the exhaust system activated, all the normal procedures starting automatically. But the crematory chamber was empty. I could see directly into it. No body, no casket, nothing to burn. Yet the temperature readings showed something was there. The system detected weight on the crematory platform, registered organic material for processing, calculated fuel consumption based on a load that didn't exist. I watched for 2 hours and 15 minutes as the furnace ran a complete cremation cycle on nothing, maintaining precisely 1,832 degrees throughout the entire process. At 5:32 a.m., the cycle completed. The system showed successful cremation, normal ash production, standard cooling procedures. But when the chamber opened, it was empty, except for a small pile of ash that hadn't been there before. The ash looked normal gray, fine, consistent with human cremation, but it felt wrong, cold, despite just coming from a furnace that had been running at over 1,800 degrees. When I touched it, my fingers went numb. I called Linda immediately. "Are you certain the chamber was empty?" she asked. "Absolutely certain," I said. "I watched the whole thing. The computer shows a full cremation, but there was nothing there." Linda arrived within an hour, bringing Kevin from IT and Officer Martinez from the police department. We reviewed the security footage together, looking for signs of break-in or tampering. The cameras showed me alone in the building, watching empty equipment that ran a complete cremation cycle on its own. The footage confirmed everything I'd reported: automatic activation, normal operation, successful completion. Processing a body that didn't exist could be a calibration issue, Kevin suggested. Sometimes systems can ghost previous operations, replay old data as new entries. But he ran full diagnostics and found nothing wrong. The crematory was operating perfectly, recording accurately, maintaining proper temperatures and timing. The mystery cremations were real operations, not replayed data or system errors. Over the following weeks, I started staying late regularly, documenting each 3:17 a.m. cremation. The pattern never varied: same time, same temperature, same duration. Always producing a small amount of ash that felt unnaturally cold and left my fingers numb. I started researching the history of our facility. Riverside Memorial had been built in 1987 on the site of an old hospital. St. Mary's Medical Center had operated there from 1923 until 1985, when they moved to a newer facility across town. The building had been demolished, but I wondered if something about the land itself might be significant. The hospital records told a story I wished I hadn't found. Room 317 had been St. Mary's morgue. For 62 years, that room had been where unclaimed bodies were stored, where people who died alone waited for burial or cremation. The records showed hundreds of unclaimed deceased processed through room 317 over the decades. But in 1984, something had gone wrong. A fire in the hospital's basement had damaged the morgue's refrigeration system. 17 bodies had been stored in room 317 when the cooling failed, and they decomposed before anyone discovered the problem. The hospital had been forced to cremate all 17 as a group. No individual services, no family notification, no proper documentation. The cremation had been performed at exactly 3:17 a.m. on February 15, 1984. The temperature had been maintained at 1,832 degrees. The procedure had taken 2 hours and 15 minutes. Our crematory had been built directly over the spot where room 317 used to be. The next night, I brought a camera to document the 317 cremation. When the furnace activated, I photographed the empty chamber, the computer readings, the ash that appeared from nowhere. But when I developed the film, the photographs showed something different. The crematory chamber wasn't empty. 17 figures lay on the platform, indistinct, translucent, but clearly human forms. They were holding hands, connected in a chain of comfort and solidarity. Their faces were peaceful, resigned, grateful. At the center of the group was a young woman who looked directly at the camera. Her mouth was moving, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Thank you for witnessing." That was 6 months ago. The 317 cremations still happen every night, maintaining perfect consistency in timing and temperature. The computer logs them faithfully, producing the same small pile of cold ash. I don't try to stop them anymore. I don't call supervisors or police officers or IT technicians. I just document each cremation, maintaining the same professional standards I apply to all our services. Because maybe the 17 forgotten souls from St. Mary's Room 317 deserve the same dignity as every other person who passes through our facility. Maybe they're not an anomaly, or a system error, or a supernatural intrusion. Maybe they're just clients who've been waiting 39 years for proper service. Last week, something changed. The ash from the 317 cremation felt warm for the first time, normal temperature instead of unnaturally cold. When I touched it, my fingers didn't go numb. Instead, I felt a sense of completion, of gratitude, of rest finally achieved. I think they know someone is witnessing now. Someone is maintaining proper records, honoring their journey, treating their final passage with the respect and dignity they were denied in 1984. The computer still logs their cremation every night at 3:17 a.m. Temperature exactly 1,832 degrees. Duration precisely 2 hours and 15 minutes. But now I understand that these aren't mystery entries or system errors. They're the most important entries in our log. Because every soul deserves proper documentation, professional care, and someone who remembers that they existed, even if they have to create their own cremation to get it. A proper seal is meant to last forever, but sometimes forever has other plans. I'm Rosa, and I've been embalming at Willowbrook Funeral Home for 11 years. It's precise work that requires attention to detail and respect for both the deceased and their families. Every step follows protocol, preparation, preservation, presentation. And when a casket gets sealed, it stays sealed. That's the whole point. I take pride in my seals. Perfect edges, even pressure, complete closure. Families trust us to protect their loved ones, and a properly sealed casket is part of that promise. Once I close and seal a casket, it should remain that way until burial. The first time I found one open, I assumed I'd made an error. It was Mrs. Chen, elderly woman who'd passed from natural causes. Simple service, traditional casket, family requested a closed viewing. I'd embalmed her on Tuesday, sealed the casket Wednesday morning before the family arrived. Professional job, everything by the book. Thursday morning, I found the casket standing open. Not wide open, just a 1/4-inch gap along the seal line. Enough to notice if you were paying attention, but subtle enough that casual observers might miss it. The seal hadn't failed catastrophically. It had opened carefully, deliberately, as if someone had released the latches from inside. Mrs. Chen looked different too. Her head had turned slightly to the right, facing toward the viewing room door instead of straight up toward the lid. Her expression seemed more peaceful, like she'd settled into a more comfortable position during the night. I checked my work notes. Everything had been done correctly. Proper embalming fluid concentrations, appropriate preservation techniques, casket sealed according to manufacturer specifications. No reason for the seal to fail or the body to shift position. I repositioned Mrs. Chen, resealed the casket, made a note to check the gasket quality with our supplier. Seals could fail occasionally, especially with older inventory. It happened. 3 days later, it happened again. This time it was Mr. Rodriguez, middle-aged man who died in a car accident. Tragic case, closed casket service at the family's request. I'd done reconstructive work, made sure he looked peaceful for the brief family viewing before sealing. Same quarter-inch gap, same careful opening, like the latches had been released from inside. Mr. Rodriguez had also shifted position. His hands, which I'd positioned clasped over his chest, were now resting at his sides. I started paying closer attention. Every casket I sealed would be found slightly open the next morning. Always the same quarter-inch gap. Always the same careful release of latches. The deceased inside had invariably shifted position, turning their heads, moving their hands, settling into what looked like more comfortable arrangements. But the bodies weren't decomposing abnormally or showing signs of gas buildup that might cause movement. They looked peaceful, well preserved, exactly as they should after proper embalming. They just repositioned themselves. I mentioned it to Director Williams. "Are you certain you're sealing them properly?" he asked. "Absolutely certain," I said. "I've been doing this for 11 years. I know how to seal a casket." "Could be faulty latches," he suggested. "Temperature changes, settling, normal factors that might affect the seal integrity." We replaced the latches on 3 caskets. The next morning, all 3 were standing open by the same quarter-inch gap. That's when I started hearing the scratching. It was subtle at first. Soft, rhythmic sounds coming from the preparation room after hours. Like fingernails against wood. Gentle and persistent. Not frantic or desperate, just purposeful. I started staying late to investigate. The preparation room after hours was quiet, peaceful, dimly lit by security lighting. 5 caskets were staged for upcoming services, all properly sealed after my afternoon work. I settled into the office chair to wait and listen. At 11:37 p.m., the scratching started. It came from all 5 caskets simultaneously, soft, measured sounds like someone knocking politely on a door. Not the violent thrashing of someone buried alive, but the gentle tapping of someone asking for attention. I approached the first casket, elderly woman named Dorothy. Natural death. Service scheduled for Friday. The scratching was coming from inside, rhythmic and patient. When I listened carefully, I could hear other sounds too. Soft rustling, like fabric moving. Quiet shifting, like someone getting comfortable. The scratching stopped when I touched the casket lid. I opened the latches carefully, lifting the lid just enough to peer inside. Dorothy looked exactly as I'd left her, peaceful, well-preserved, hands clasped over her chest. But her eyes were open, looking directly at me. "Thank you," she whispered. I jerked back, slamming the lid shut. Dorothy was dead. Had been dead for 3 days. I'd embalmed her personally, confirmed cessation of all vital functions, followed every protocol. But her eyes had been open. Her lips had moved. She'd spoken. I stood there for 10 minutes, heart racing, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Stress, fatigue, too many long hours. The mind could play tricks, especially in quiet funeral homes late at night. Then the scratching resumed. All 5 caskets, same gentle rhythm. Not distressed or frightened, just asking for something. Permission, maybe, or acknowledgement. I opened each casket. Dorothy, eyes open, smiling gratefully. "Thank you for listening." Mr. Patel, slight nod of appreciation. I was getting cramped. Young woman named Lisa, repositioning her hands more comfortably. Much better. All of them aware, all of them grateful, all of them making small adjustments to find more comfortable positions in their eternal rest. None of them seemed disturbed by being dead. They spoke quietly, moved carefully, treated their situation with the same dignity and respect they'd probably shown in life. They just needed to make some modifications to the arrangements I'd made for them. "Are you in pain?" I asked Dorothy. "Oh no, dear," she said. "You did lovely work. I just need to turn toward the door, I like to see people coming and going. Is this normal? I asked. Lisa smiled. I wouldn't know. First time being dead. She adjusted her dress slightly. But it seems like we should be comfortable, don't you think? It's going to be a while. That was 8 months ago. I still seal every casket properly, following all protocols and manufacturer specifications. But I don't worry when I find them open in the morning. Instead, I've started leaving a note inside each casket. Feel free to adjust as needed. You know what's comfortable for you. The scratching has stopped. The casket's still open by a 1/4 inch each night, but quietly now, without the polite knocking sounds. The deceased still reposition themselves, but they seem more settled, more at peace. And sometimes, very quietly, I hear them talking to each other in the preparation room after hours. Gentle conversations between people who have all the time in the world and are learning to make the best of their new circumstances. I don't disturb them. Everyone deserves to be comfortable in their final rest, even if comfort means unsealing caskets that were meant to stay closed forever. Some grief is so deep it becomes its own form of time travel. I'm James, and I've been caretaker at Maplewood Cemetery for 14 years. It's peaceful work, most of the time maintaining the grounds, helping visitors find their loved ones, ensuring everyone who comes here feels welcome and respected. The cemetery serves the living as much as it honors the dead. That's why I noticed her immediately. She didn't belong to this century. First saw her on a Thursday morning in October, walking slowly between the headstones in Section C. She was wearing a black dress from the 1940s, long sleeves, modest neckline, hem that fell well below her knees. The fabric looked like genuine mourning crepe, the kind they don't make anymore. Her hair was pinned back in victory rolls, and she carried herself with the formal posture of someone from another era. She was placing fresh flowers on graves, modern flowers, roses from a contemporary florist, still wrapped in cellophane with current price tags. But the graves she was visiting were decades old. Headstones from the 1950s and 60s, weathered granite with names I recognized from the older burial records. I approached her carefully. Visitors sometimes got confused about plot locations, especially elderly family members who hadn't been to the cemetery in years. "Good morning," I said. "Can I help you find someone specific?" She turned toward me with a gentle smile. Her face was timeless, could have been 30 or 70, with features that seemed familiar, but just out of reach. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," she said. "I'm just visiting old friends." She knew my name, though I was certain we'd never met. The nameplate on my uniform was too small to read from a distance, and I didn't recognize her from any of the regular visitors. "These are beautiful flowers," I said, gesturing to the arrangements she'd already placed. "The families will appreciate them." "Everyone deserves to be remembered," she said, "especially those who might otherwise be forgotten." She continued her work, placing flowers on graves with practiced efficiency. I watched her move through Section C, stopping at headstones I knew had no living family members. Plots that never received visitors, never got flowers, never had anyone to remember the people buried there. When she finished, she walked toward the main gates. I followed at a respectful distance, curious about how she'd arrived. No car was parked in the visitor lot, no taxi waiting on the street. She approached the iron gates, which were closed and locked. We didn't open to the public until 9 a.m., and it was only 8:30. But instead of waiting or asking me to unlock them, she simply walked through, not around, not over, through. She passed between the iron bars like they weren't there, her mourning dress flowing undisturbed, her flowers intact. When I reached the gates 30 seconds later, they were still locked solid. No gap wide enough for a person to pass through. No explanation for what I'd just witnessed. The flowers were real, though. Fresh roses on 12 graves that hadn't been visited in years. She came back the following Thursday, same time, same morning dress, same purposeful movement through Section C. This time I was ready for her, waiting by the gates at 8:15. "Excuse me," I called out as she approached. How did you get in? The gates are locked. Good morning, James, she said, using my first name now. Such a lovely morning for visiting. The cemetery isn't open yet, I said. I need to ask how you entered the grounds. She smiled, the same gentle expression from our previous encounter. I've been coming here for a very long time. I know all the entrances, but there weren't any other entrances. Maplewood was surrounded by iron fencing, with only the main gates providing access. The fence was 8 feet tall, topped with decorative spikes, impossible to climb discreetly. What's your name? I asked. I keep visitor logs. I should have a record. Catherine, she said. Catherine Morrison. She continued past me toward Section C, placing fresh flowers on the same 12 graves. Modern flowers on old graves. Contemporary arrangements for people who died before she was born. When she finished, she walked through the iron gates again, solid metal parting like mist, to let her pass. I spent my lunch break researching Catherine Morrison in our burial records. She was there, clear as day. Catherine Elizabeth Morrison died 1946, age 28. Car accident on her wedding day, buried in Section C, Plot 17A, survived by her parents and her fiancé, Robert Patterson. Patterson, my great-grandfather's name. I found the family photographs that night, digging through boxes in my grandmother's attic. Wedding pictures from 1946, including one of my great-grandfather Robert with his intended bride. Catherine Morrison looked exactly like the woman who'd been visiting graves every Thursday morning. The next week, I was waiting for her at Plot 17A. She approached slowly, carrying her usual bouquet of modern flowers. When she saw me standing beside her headstone, she stopped. You know, she said. It wasn't a question. Catherine Morrison, I said, died 1946. You were supposed to marry my great-grandfather. Robert, she said, her voice soft with old affection. How is he? He died in 1993, I said. Married my great-grandmother in 1948. Had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. He had a good life. Catherine smiled, genuine happiness crossing her face. I'm so glad. I worried about him. After the accident. I hoped he wouldn't spend too long grieving. Why do you come here? I asked. Why these particular graves? Lonely people, Catherine said. The forgotten ones. People who died without family, or whose families have all passed on. Everyone deserves visitors, even if they have to come from someone who understands being left behind. She placed flowers on her own grave, then began her rounds through Section C. I followed, watching her tend to plots that hadn't been maintained in decades. She knew details about each person, their hobbies, their favorite colors, small personal things that only friends would remember. How do you know so much about them? I asked. We talk, Catherine said simply. When you spend enough time in a place, you get to know your neighbors. We finished the rounds together. As we approached the gates, Catherine turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Will you continue this when I can't? She asked. Continue what? Remembering them. Making sure they have flowers. Some of them have been waiting 70 years for a visitor. Are you leaving? Catherine looked toward the gates, where morning sunlight was streaming through the iron bars. Robert's calling, she said. It's time to go to him. That was the last time I saw Catherine Morrison. But every Thursday morning, I continue her rounds through Section C. 12 graves that never had visitors now get fresh flowers every week. I've learned their names, their stories, the small details that made them human. And sometimes, very quietly, I swear I can hear them talking to each other in the early morning mist. Grateful conversations between old friends, no longer lonely, no longer forgotten. Because Catherine Morrison taught me that grief can become love, and love can become service, and service can bridge any gap, even the one between life and death. The iron gates still stand solid and locked every morning. But I understand now that some barriers exist only for those who need them to exist. And some visitors have been coming here much longer than any of us realize. Death is supposed to be cold, but some departures refuse to accept the rules. I'm Linda, and I've been crematory supervisor at Riverside Memorial for 7 years. Part of my job involves monitoring the deceased before cremation, ensuring proper storage, maintaining appropriate conditions, documenting everything for family peace of mind. Our refrigeration units keep bodies at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, preventing decomposition and preserving dignity. The infrared thermometer never lies. Point, click, instant reading. Essential equipment for monitoring storage conditions and ensuring everything stays within proper parameters. That's why the readings made no sense. It started with Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, elderly woman who'd passed peacefully in her sleep. Natural death, no complications, family scheduled cremation for the following week. Standard procedure: receive the body, complete documentation, place in refrigerated storage until processing. When I checked her storage temperature the next morning, the thermometer read 98.6 degrees. Body temperature, living person temperature. Impossible temperature for someone who'd been dead for 18 hours and refrigerated for 12. I checked the refrigeration unit, working perfectly, maintaining 38 degrees throughout the storage area. The ambient temperature was exactly where it should be. But Mrs. Hayes's body temperature registered as normal human warmth. I tested the thermometer on other bodies in storage. All read 38 degrees, consistent with proper refrigeration. Only Mrs. Hayes showed the impossible reading. I mentioned it to Ben, our crematory technician. Thermometer might be malfunctioning, he said. Sometimes the infrared sensors get confused by reflective surfaces or unusual conditions. We tested the device on various surfaces throughout the facility. It worked perfectly accurate readings on walls, floors, equipment, other bodies. Only Mrs. Hayes produced the anomalous result. 3 days later, it happened again. Mr. Frank Chen, heart attack victim, scheduled for weekend cremation. He'd been in storage for 2 days, properly refrigerated. Everything by protocol. His body temperature read 98.6 degrees. I started testing every body systematically, documenting the readings in a separate log. Most registered the expected 38 degrees, but roughly 1 in 5 showed normal living temperature, despite being deceased and refrigerated for days or weeks. The pattern made no sense. Age didn't matter. Elderly and young people both showed the anomalous readings. Cause of death wasn't a factor. Natural deaths, accidents, medical complications, all equally likely to maintain impossible warmth. Length of storage time was irrelevant. Some bodies stayed warm for days, others for weeks. But the bodies showing normal temperature had one thing in common. They all seemed more peaceful than the others. Their facial expressions were serene, relaxed, like they'd found comfort in death. Their positioning looked natural, unstrained, as if they were simply sleeping rather than deceased. Even their skin tone seemed healthier, less pale than typical post-mortem presentation. I started researching medical explanations, decomposition gases, chemical reactions, residual metabolic activity, but none of the possibilities aligned with what I was observing. These bodies weren't decomposing abnormally or showing signs of biological activity. They looked exactly like properly preserved, deceased individuals. They were just warm. 2 weeks later, I experienced something that changed my understanding completely. Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez had been with us for 5 days, awaiting cremation while her family made final arrangements. Every day, her body temperature registered 98.6 degrees, while the storage temperature remained 38. I was doing evening documentation when I heard her voice. "Excuse me, dear." I looked up from my paperwork. The storage area was empty, except for the refrigerated units, all closed and secured. But the voice had been clear, gentle, coming from Mrs. Gonzalez's storage unit. "Yes," I said, feeling foolish for responding to what had to be my imagination. "Could you turn up the temperature just a little? It's quite cold in here." I walked to her storage unit, hands shaking slightly. The infrared thermometer showed her body at 98.6 degrees, but she was complaining about being cold in 38-degree storage. "Mrs. Gonzalez?" I said. "Yes, dear. I don't mean to be trouble, but the cold is rather uncomfortable." I opened the storage unit. Mrs. Gonzalez looked exactly as she had when we'd received her, peaceful, well-preserved, clearly deceased. But her lips moved slightly when she spoke. Are you in pain?" I asked. "Oh no, nothing like that," she said. "Just chilly. Death is colder than I expected. Take some getting used to." Over the following hour, Mrs. Gonzalez and I had a conversation that challenged everything I thought I knew about death and consciousness. She was aware of her situation, understood that she'd died, but experienced her current state more like an uncomfortable transition than a final ending. "The warm ones are adjusting better," she explained when I asked about the temperature readings. "Some of us maintain our warmth while we figure out how to let go completely. It's a process." "Let go of what?" "Life," she said simply. "Habits of living, breathing, staying warm, being concerned about comfort. Most people release everything quickly, but some of us are particular about the details." That night, I started checking on the warm ones regularly, speaking to them quietly, asking about their comfort and concerns. They were all aware, all adjusting to their new circumstances, all grateful for someone who acknowledged their continued presence. They weren't suffering or distressed. They were simply taking their time with the transition from life to death, maintaining familiar patterns like body temperature while they learned to exist without them. The conversations were always gentle, practical, focused on small comforts and minor adjustments. They asked about their families, wondered about funeral arrangements, sometimes requested small favors like adjusting their positioning or speaking to their loved ones. Most importantly, they all eventually cooled down. Mrs. Gonzalez's temperature dropped to 38 degrees 3 days after our conversation. Mrs. Hayes took a week. Mr. Chen needed 2 weeks to finally release his warmth and settle into death completely. When they cooled, they stopped speaking. Not because they'd become less present, but because they'd found peace with their situation. I don't mention the conversations in my reports. The temperature readings are documented professionally: 98.6 degrees when applicable, 38 degrees when storage is optimal. But I understand now that the readings aren't malfunctions or anomalies. They're measurements of souls taking their time to say goodbye. Last week, a young man named David arrived with a temperature reading of 98.6. When I checked on him privately, he was worried about his mother. "She doesn't understand that I'm okay," he said. "Can you tell her that dying didn't hurt? That I'm not afraid?" I attended David's service the next day and found an opportunity to speak quietly with his mother. "David wanted you to know that he's at peace," I told her. "He's not in pain and he's not afraid." She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because," I said, "he told me." David's temperature dropped to 38 degrees that evening. Now I understand that my job involves more than monitoring storage conditions and maintaining proper documentation. Sometimes it means helping souls finish their transition, providing comfort during their adjustment to death, being a bridge between the world they've left and the peace they're seeking. The infrared thermometer still gives impossible readings, 98.6 degrees for people who should be cold. But I know now that it's measuring something more important than body temperature. It's measuring the warmth of souls who aren't quite ready to let go. Some signatures are written by hands that no longer exist, but the gratitude remains real. I'm Carol, and I've been funeral attendant at Harmony Memorial Chapel for 10 years. Part of my job involves managing the guest books, making sure they're available for every service, positioned where mourners can sign them easily, collected afterward for the families to keep. It's a simple tradition that provides comfort during grief. Guest books tell stories. Childhood friends sharing memories. Co-workers expressing condolences. Family members writing final messages of love. The handwriting varies: shaky signatures from elderly relatives, careful script from formal acquaintances, hurried scrawls from people struggling with emotion. But some signatures appear when no one is watching. The first time I noticed, it was Mrs. Dorothy Kim's service. Small gathering, maybe 20 people, mostly family. I'd monitored the guest book throughout the visitation, helping elderly relatives who needed assistance, making sure everyone who wanted to sign had the opportunity. After the service ended and the family left, I collected the book for Dorothy's daughter. Flipping through the pages to make sure everything was legible, I found an entry I hadn't seen before. The signature was in beautiful, flowing script. Dorothy Kim. Below it, in the same handwriting, "Thank you for coming." Dorothy had signed her own guest book. The handwriting matched her signature on the funeral home contracts. I checked twice to be certain. Same elegant loops, same distinctive capital letters, same careful formation. But Dorothy had been dead for 3 days. She couldn't have signed anything. I mentioned it to Director Martinez, thinking maybe a family member had signed Dorothy's name as a memorial gesture. "Families do strange things with grief," he said. "Maybe her daughter wanted Dorothy's name in the book. Sweet tribute, really." But when I called Dorothy's daughter to arrange pickup of the guest book, she was confused. "Mom's signature," she said. "No, we didn't add that. None of us would have." "That's a little odd, isn't it?" The following week, it happened again. Robert Harrison's service, traditional ceremony. About 30 guests. I'd watched the guest book carefully, knowing what to look for now. Normal signatures throughout the day, family, friends, neighbors. No anomalies, no unexplained entries. But after everyone left, there it was. Robert Harrison, "Thank you for coming." Same elegant handwriting, same impossible signature, from someone who'd been dead for 4 days. I started documenting every funeral service systematically, photographing the guest books before and after each ceremony. The pattern became clear. Roughly half of all deceased signed their own guest books, always with the same message, always in handwriting that matched their legal signatures. The signatures appeared only after services ended, never while guests were present. They were always perfectly formed, no shaking, no hesitation, no sign of supernatural struggle. Just clear, grateful acknowledgement of the people who'd come to honor their lives. 3 months later, I decided to test my theory. Mr. Frank Peterson's service was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Small gathering, limited family, simple ceremony. I set up the guest book as usual, but this time, I stayed in the viewing room after everyone left. The chapel was empty, quiet, peaceful. Afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the floor. Frank's casket was closed, surrounded by floral arrangements from his children and grandchildren. At 4:37 p.m., I heard the soft scratch of pen on paper. I turned toward the guest book stand. The pen was moving across the page on its own, guided by an invisible hand. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Frank Peterson. Below that, "Thank you for coming." The pen lifted, hovering in the air for a moment, then settled back into its holder. I walked to the guest book, hands trembling slightly. Frank's signature was there, fresh ink still drying, handwriting that matched the signature on his will and insurance documents. But no hand had been visible writing it. "Frank?" I said to the empty room. No response, but the temperature seemed to warm slightly. The afternoon light through the stained glass grew brighter, more welcoming. I understood then that Frank was expressing gratitude not just for the ceremony, but for the people who'd taken time to remember him, to speak about his life, to acknowledge that he'd mattered. Over the following months, I started talking to the deceased after their services. "Did you enjoy the ceremony, Mrs. Adams? Your grandson spoke beautifully about you, Mr. Thompson. The flowers were lovely, Sarah. Your mother chose well." I never heard direct responses, but the signs were clear. Warmth in the room, brightening of light, sometimes the faint scent of cologne or perfume associated with the deceased, and always, eventually, their signature in the guest book, "Thank you for coming." The message was consistent, universal, heartfelt, Every deceased person who signed their book expressed the same sentiment: gratitude for the people who'd gathered to honor their memory. I started leaving extra time after services, giving the deceased space to add their signatures privately. It became part of my routine setup: monitor during the ceremony, collect signatures afterward. Professional, respectful, acknowledging both the living and the dead. 6 months ago, something extraordinary happened. Mrs. Helen Rodriguez's service was particularly moving. Large gathering, multiple speakers, beautiful music. Helen had been a teacher for 40 years, and dozens of former students attended to share memories of her impact on their lives. After everyone left, I waited for Helen's signature as usual. The pen moved across the page, but this time it wrote more than her name and the standard message. Helen Rodriguez, thank you for coming. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for letting me see how much my life mattered. Below that, in slightly different handwriting, please tell my daughter Maria that I heard every word she spoke. I'm proud of the woman she became. I attended Helen's burial the next day and found Maria standing alone by the graveside after the ceremony. Your mother wanted me to give you a message, I said. Maria looked surprised. A message? She heard every word you spoke at the service. She's proud of the woman you became. Maria's eyes filled with tears. Those were her exact words to me when I graduated college. How could you possibly know that? Because, I said, she told me. That evening, I found an envelope on my desk at the funeral home. Inside was a note in Helen's handwriting. Thank you for being the bridge between us and those we love. Your kindness makes the transition easier for everyone. Now I understand that guest books serve two purposes. They preserve memories for the living, but they also provide a way for the departed to express gratitude for being remembered. Every signature that appears after hours is real, written by people who no longer have physical hands, but still have appreciation for love expressed, stories shared, and lives celebrated. The messages are always the same. Thank you for coming. But the gratitude behind those words is deeper than any living person could express. It's the profound relief of knowing that your existence mattered, that people took time to gather and remember, that your story will continue even after you're gone. I collect those impossible signatures with the same care I give to every other entry. They're included in the guest books I give to families, though I never mention their supernatural origin. The families deserve to know that their loved ones were grateful, even if they can't understand how that gratitude was expressed. Last week, a young woman named Jennifer Service had an unusually large turnout. College friends, work colleagues, extended family people who'd traveled from across the country to attend. After everyone left, Jennifer's signature appeared as expected, but with an additional note. I never knew so many people cared. Thank you for showing me how much love exists in the world. The guest book now serves as a bridge between the living and the dead, a place where gratitude can be expressed by people who no longer have voices but still have overwhelming appreciation for being remembered. Every signature that appears after hours reminds me that death isn't the end of caring or of recognition or of the deep human need to say thank you. And every time I see that familiar message, thank you for coming, I'm reminded that some of the most important conversations happen in the silence after we think the talking is done. Sometimes the dead arrive before they're supposed to, bringing their mourners with them. I'm Victor, and I've been burial coordinator at Sunset Hills Cemetery for 12 years. My job involves managing plot assignments, scheduling interments, coordinating with families and funeral homes. Everything follows a precise timeline: plot reserved, service scheduled, burial conducted. No confusion, no mistakes, no surprises. The system is foolproof. Plot numbers are assigned months in advance, families are notified of exact locations, groundskeepers prepare graves according to the schedule. Every burial has its place and time. That's why the flowers made no sense. Plot 47C was scheduled to remain empty until November. The previous occupant had been moved to accommodate family consolidation, and the new burial wasn't planned for another 6 weeks. The plot should have been bare ground, unmarked, waiting. Instead, I found fresh flowers, not old arrangements or wind-blown debris from nearby graves. Fresh roses, still dewy from the florist, arranged in a perfect spray across the empty plot, the kind of flowers families bring to honor recent burials. I checked my records twice. Plot 47C was definitely empty, definitely unscheduled. No legitimate reason for floral arrangements. I removed the flowers, thinking someone had made a mistake about plot locations. Easy error to make. Section 47 was large, and the numbered markers could be confusing for grieving families. The next morning, the flowers were back. Same roses, same arrangement, same careful placement. As if someone had returned overnight to restore the memorial display I'd disturbed. I stationed myself near Section 47 during visiting hours, watching for anyone who might be confused about plot locations. Around 2 p.m., an elderly woman approached 47C carrying fresh flowers. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching carefully. "I think there might be some confusion about the plot location. This grave is currently unoccupied." She looked at me with gentle surprise. "Unoccupied? But Thomas was buried here last week. I'm his sister, Margaret." "Ma'am, I'm certain this plot is empty. There haven't been any recent burials in Section 47. Margaret knelt down, placing her flowers on the bare ground. "Such a beautiful service," she said. "The whole family came. Thomas would have been so pleased to see everyone together." She spoke about Thomas with intimate knowledge, his favorite hymns, his love of gardening, his pride in his grandchildren. Details only close family would know. But according to my records, no one named Thomas had been buried anywhere in Sunset Hills for the past month. "Margaret," I said gently, "what's Thomas's full name? Maybe I can help you find the correct location." "Thomas Franklin Morrison," she said. "Died October 15th. Heart attack. Very sudden. We barely had time to make arrangements." I checked the burial schedule on my tablet. Thomas Franklin Morrison was listed for plot 47C, but his burial date was November 23rd, 5 weeks in the future. "Margaret," I said carefully, "today is October 20th. Thomas's burial isn't scheduled until next month." She looked confused, then sad. "Oh dear," she said. "I sometimes get the dates mixed up. Getting old, you know. But the flowers help me remember him." That evening, I researched Thomas Franklin Morrison. The obituary was already published. Died October 15th. Services pending. Burial scheduled at Sunset Hills Cemetery. Everything legitimate. Everything properly arranged. Thomas Morrison had died 5 days ago, but his burial wasn't scheduled for 5 weeks. Yet his sister was visiting his grave, as if he'd already been interred. The next day, more family members appeared. Thomas's son brought a small American flag, mentioning Thomas's military service. His daughter-in-law placed a potted plant, saying Thomas had always loved chrysanthemums. His grandchildren left handwritten notes, sharing memories of fishing trips and birthday celebrations. All of them spoke about Thomas in the past tense, referencing his funeral, discussing details from his service. They knew intimate things about his life and death that only close family would know. But Thomas Morrison's body was still at the funeral home, awaiting burial in 5 weeks. I called Morrison Funeral Home to verify. "Yes, we have Thomas Morrison," the director confirmed. "Viewing is this weekend. Burial scheduled for November 23rd at Sunset Hills." "Why do you ask?" "I have family members visiting his grave," I said. "But he's not buried yet." "That's unusual," the director said. "Are you certain they're at the right location?" I started documenting the visits systematically. Every day, different family members arrived at plot 47C, bringing flowers, sharing memories, conducting themselves exactly like people visiting a recently buried loved one. They spoke about Thomas's funeral service, the music, the flowers, the speeches given by family and friends. They mentioned specific details about the ceremony, the reception afterward, conversations they'd had with other relatives. But the funeral hadn't happened yet. 2 weeks later, I decided to attend Thomas's actual viewing. Morrison Funeral Home was hosting a traditional service, exactly as the family had described to me at the cemetery. Same hymns, same flowers, same gathering of relatives I'd been meeting at Plot 47C. Margaret was there, wearing the same dress she'd worn when placing flowers on the empty grave. Thomas's son wore the military pin he'd mentioned when bringing the flag. The grandchildren looked exactly as I'd expected, based on their handwritten notes. But none of them recognized me. When I introduced myself as the cemetery coordinator, they seemed confused. "We haven't been to the cemetery yet," Margaret said. "The burial isn't until next month." "But I've been speaking with you at Thomas's grave," I said. "You've been visiting every day." Margaret looked concerned. "I haven't left the house much since Thomas died. Too upset to drive. This is my first time out since the funeral arrangements." That evening, I returned to Plot 47C. Margaret was there, placing fresh flowers on the empty ground. "Hello, Victor," she said, using my name, though I'd never introduced myself during this encounter. "Thank you for being so patient with our visits." "Margaret," I said, "I saw you at the funeral home tonight. You didn't recognize me." She smiled gently. "There are different versions of all of us," she said. "The Margaret you met tonight is still processing Thomas's death, still struggling with grief. I'm the Margaret who's accepted it, who's found peace with saying goodbye." "Are you saying—" "I'm saying grief moves at its own pace," Margaret interrupted. "Some of us need to start visiting before the burial, need to practice saying goodbye, need to prepare for the finality. The cemetery understands. It makes space for the love that exists outside of time." Over the following weeks, I met both versions of Thomas's family. The living relatives, still processing their loss, preparing for the upcoming burial, and the grieving relatives, already adjusted to their sorrow, visiting the grave where Thomas would eventually rest. Both versions were real. Both versions needed to honor Thomas's memory. Both versions deserved respect and accommodation. On November 23rd, Thomas Franklin Morrison was buried in Plot 47C. The service was exactly as his visiting family had described. Same hymns, same flowers, same heartfelt speeches. But the family members who attended the burial were different from the ones who'd been visiting the empty grave. Less practiced in their grief, more raw in their sorrow, still learning how to say goodbye. The visiting family disappeared after the burial. Plot 47C now receives normal memorial visits from living relatives who recognize me and remember our conversations. But I understand now that cemeteries serve multiple timelines. They accommodate the dead who are buried, the living who visit, and the grieving who exist somewhere in between, practicing their farewells, adjusting to loss, finding ways to honor love that transcends the boundaries of when and where. Sometimes families need to start mourning before the burial. Sometimes love arrives ahead of schedule. And sometimes the most important visits happen before there's officially anywhere to visit. Some phone calls echo across decades, looking for someone who will finally answer properly. I'm Helen, and I've been after-hours operator at Meadowbrook Funeral Home for 8 years. Night shift is quiet, mostly emergency calls, family questions, coordination with hospitals and coroners. The phone system is modern, digital, professional. Every call gets logged automatically with timestamps and caller identification. But some calls come from numbers that shouldn't exist anymore. The first time it happened, I thought it was a system error. 2:43 a.m. on a Tuesday in September. The phone rang once, sharp and clear in the quiet office. Caller ID showed a local number, 555-7218. Meadowbrook Funeral Home. "This is Helen. Good evening," said a woman's voice. Elderly, polite. "I'm calling about pickup arrangements for my husband." "Of course," I said, pulling up the intake form on my computer. "What's your husband's name?" "William McCarthy," she said. "He passed this morning at Mercy Hospital, room 207. I'd like to arrange transport. Standard call. Routine procedure. I started filling out the digital form, noting the time and location. What's your name, ma'am? Dorothy McCarthy. I'm his wife. And your contact number? 555-7218. I confirmed the details. Scheduled the pickup for morning. Provided our standard information about next steps. Professional, compassionate, efficient. The call lasted 12 minutes. When I processed the paperwork in the morning, I discovered several problems. Mercy Hospital had no record of William McCarthy dying in room 207. No death certificate. No family contact. No request for funeral home services. Room 207 was occupied by a living patient who'd been there for a week. More disturbing, the phone number 555-7218 had been disconnected in 1987. I called the number to verify. Automated message: the number you have dialed is no longer in service. But I'd just spoken to Dorothy McCarthy from that exact number. I mentioned it to Director Phillips when he arrived. Crank call, probably, he said. Someone playing games with old phone numbers, pretending to need services. Happens occasionally. But the call had felt completely legitimate. Dorothy McCarthy sounded genuinely grieved, properly concerned about her husband's care. Nothing about the conversation suggested deception or malicious intent. 2 weeks later, the same number called again. Same time, 2:43 a.m. Same caller ID, 555-7218. Same voice. Elderly woman. Polite. Distressed. Good evening. This is Dorothy McCarthy. I'm calling about pickup arrangements for my husband, William. Mrs. McCarthy, I said. I think there might be some confusion. We spoke 2 weeks ago, but we couldn't locate your husband at Mercy Hospital. He passed this morning, Dorothy said, as if our previous conversation had never happened. Room 207. Heart attack. Very sudden. I'd like to arrange transport. She provided the exact same information, word for word, as if reading from a script she'd memorized 36 years ago. I played along, taking down the details, knowing they wouldn't lead anywhere. But Dorothy McCarthy's grief sounded genuine. Her concern for her husband's dignity was real, even if the circumstances were impossible. After she hung up, I researched William and Dorothy McCarthy. The obituaries from 1987 told their story. William McCarthy, age 73, died of heart attack at Mercy Hospital on September 22nd. Survived by his wife Dorothy. Services held at Meadowbrook Funeral Home. Dorothy McCarthy died the same day as William. Car accident driving home from the hospital, killed instantly while rushing to make funeral arrangements. Their phone number, 555-7218, had been disconnected after their deaths. Every 2 weeks, Dorothy McCarthy called from her disconnected number, trying to arrange pickup for her husband, who died 36 years ago. I started staying late on the nights I expected her call, researching the McCarthy's story. William had died alone at Mercy Hospital, while Dorothy was at home. She'd received the call about his death, immediately driven to the hospital, then called Meadowbrook to arrange services. But she died in the car accident before completing the arrangements. William's pickup was never scheduled. Emergency services found Dorothy's body, with our business card clutched in her hand, our phone number written in her careful handwriting. The next time Dorothy called, I was ready. Mrs. McCarthy, I said gently, William has already been taken care of. The pickup was completed, and he's resting peacefully. Silence on the line for a long moment. Are you certain? Dorothy asked, her voice smaller, more vulnerable. Yes, ma'am. William is safe with us. You don't need to worry about the arrangements anymore. But I never finished the paperwork, she said. I was driving to the funeral home when... The paperwork is complete, I said. Everything was handled properly. William received the dignity and care you wanted for him. Another long silence. Thank you, Dorothy whispered. I was so worried. I couldn't bear the thought of him waiting alone. He's not alone, I said. And neither are you. The line went quiet, but I could hear Dorothy crying softly. I can rest now? She asked. Yes, ma'am. You can rest. The call ended. Dorothy McCarthy never called again. But I started researching other recurring calls, other impossible numbers that appeared on our phone logs. Over the past 8 years, I'd received dozens of calls from disconnected numbers. People who died before completing funeral arrangements for their loved ones, still trying to fulfill their final responsibilities. I began handling these calls differently. Instead of pointing out inconsistencies or impossibilities, I provided the comfort and completion the callers needed. I confirmed that their loved ones had been cared for, that arrangements were complete, that they could stop worrying and find peace. Each time, the calls stopped after I provided that reassurance. Last month, I received a call from 555-3496. Another disconnected number. Another grieving widow trying to arrange services for her husband who died in 1993. Mrs. Patterson, I said, Thomas has been taken care of. He's resting peacefully. And all the arrangements were completed exactly as you wanted. Even the flowers? She asked. I wanted white roses, but I never got to tell anyone. Especially the flowers, I said. White roses, just as you requested. Thomas would have loved them. Thank you, she said. I've been so worried for 30 years. These calls taught me that love doesn't end with death, and neither do responsibilities. Sometimes people die before they can complete their final acts of care, and their spirits spend decades trying to fulfill promises they made to their loved ones. My job isn't just answering phones and taking messages. Sometimes it's providing closure to people who've been waiting 30 or 40 years for someone to confirm that their loved ones were treated with dignity. The phone still rings at 2:43 a.m. sometimes, but less frequently now. Word seems to spread among the dead there's someone at Meadowbrook who understands, who can provide the reassurance that allows worried spirits to finally rest. And sometimes the most important conversation is the one that should have happened decades ago, but waited until someone was ready to hear it properly. Some farewells require seeing the face one more time, even when the family thought they couldn't bear it. I'm Paula, and I've been viewing coordinator at Graceland Memorial Chapel for 9 years. Part of my job involves helping families decide between open and closed casket services, supporting them through one of the most difficult choices they'll make during their grief. Once that decision is made, it stays made. Families need consistency during their loss. But sometimes the dead have different ideas about what their loved ones need. The first time it happened, I thought I'd made an error with the service instructions. Mrs. Angela Torres had requested a closed casket service for her husband Miguel. Car accident, significant trauma, family preferred to remember him as he was in life. I'd prepared Miguel carefully, sealed the casket according to the family's wishes, arranged the flowers and memorial displays. An hour before the service, I found the casket standing open. Not damaged or forced, the latches had been released properly, the lid raised with care. Miguel looked peaceful, well prepared, exactly as he should for an open casket viewing. His injuries had been expertly concealed, his expression serene. I immediately called Mrs. Torres, thinking there'd been miscommunication about the family's wishes. Open casket? She said, confused. No, we specifically requested closed. I can't. I don't want to see him like that. Of course, I said. I'll close it immediately. There must have been some confusion. I sealed the casket again, double-checking the latches, ensuring everything was secure. Professional error, easily corrected. 20 minutes later, the casket was open again. Same careful release of latches, same respectful positioning. Miguel looked exactly as he had before, peaceful, dignified, ready for final farewells. But his family had been clear about their preference for a closed casket service. I closed it again, this time staying in the viewing room to observe. The service was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes, and I needed to ensure the family's wishes were respected. At exactly 3 p.m., the latches released on their own. I watched the casket lid rise slowly, smoothly, as if operated by invisible hands. No mechanical failure, no external force. The casket opened itself, revealing Miguel's peaceful face to the empty viewing room. The Torres family began arriving shortly after. Mrs. Torres saw the open casket and stopped in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I said closed," she whispered to me. "I can't look at him. I want to remember him alive." "I understand," I said. "I'll close it right away." But before I could move toward the casket, Mrs. Torres stepped forward. She approached Miguel slowly, hesitantly, as if drawn by something stronger than her fear. "Oh," she said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "He looks peaceful. He looks like himself." She stood beside the casket for several minutes, speaking quietly to Miguel, telling him about the people who'd come to honor him. Other family members approached tentatively, then with growing comfort, as they saw how natural Miguel looked. "Thank you," Mrs. Torres said to me later. "I thought I couldn't bear to see him, but I needed to say goodbye properly." Somehow the casket knew that. 3 weeks later, it happened again. Robert Chen's daughter had requested a closed casket after her father's lengthy illness. "He wouldn't want people to see him like this," she explained. "He was always so proud of his appearance." I prepared Robert with extra care, knowing the family's preference, but wanting him to look dignified regardless. Closed casket services still deserved full preparation. An hour before the service, Robert's casket was standing open. Same pattern, careful release of latches, respectful positioning, peaceful presentation. Robert looked distinguished, well-groomed, exactly like the proud man his daughter remembered. His daughter arrived early and saw the open casket immediately. "I said closed," she told me, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can close it," I offered. She approached the casket slowly, studying her father's face. "He looks good," she said with surprise. "Better than he has in months. He looks like Dad again." The service proceeded with an open casket. Family and friends shared stories about Robert's dignity, his pride in his appearance, his careful attention to how he presented himself to the world. Seeing him looking distinguished and peaceful seemed to comfort everyone. Over the following months, I noticed the pattern clearly. Caskets opened themselves only when families had chosen closed casket services out of fear rather than genuine preference. When relatives were afraid to see their loved ones, worried about final memories, concerned about trauma or appearance, but the caskets never opened when families had made thoughtful, confident decisions about closed services. Only when grief was being driven by fear instead of healing. I started preparing every deceased person as if they might have an open casket, regardless of family preferences. If the casket was going to open itself, I wanted the deceased to be ready for final farewells. Mrs. Dorothy Kim's son had requested closed casket after his mother's sudden stroke. "She looks so different," he explained. "I want to remember her smile, not this." I prepared Dorothy with special attention to her expression, working to restore the gentle smile her son remembered. When her casket opened itself an hour before the service, Dorothy looked exactly like the loving mother her family needed to see. Her son approached the casket with tears in his eyes. "There's her smile," he whispered. "There's my mom." The phenomenon seemed to understand exactly what each family needed. Caskets opened when final farewells required seeing the face, when closure needed that visual connection, when fear was preventing healthy grief. But they stayed closed when families had made peace with their decision, when closed casket truly served their healing, when privacy was genuinely preferred over viewing. Last month, young Timothy's parents had requested closed casket after their son's accident. "He's only 12, his mother said. "I can't let people see him hurt." I prepared Timothy carefully, working to restore his peaceful, youthful appearance. When his casket opened itself, he looked like a sleeping child, unmarked by trauma, serene and beautiful. His mother stood beside the casket for an hour, stroking his hair, telling him about the people who'd come to say goodbye. "I thought I was protecting him," she said, "but he was protecting me, letting me see that he's okay, that he's not in pain anymore. I've stopped trying to prevent the caskets from opening. Instead, I prepare for the possibility, ensuring every deceased person is ready for final farewells, whether the family expects them or not. Because sometimes the dead understand what their loved ones need better than the living do. Sometimes healing requires seeing the peaceful face, touching the quiet hands, confirming that death isn't the horror we fear, but simply the next step in existence. The caskets don't open themselves randomly or maliciously. They open when love needs one more look, when grief requires visual closure, when fear is keeping families from the farewells they actually need. And they always reveal exactly what the mourning heart is ready to see. Not trauma or pain, but peace and dignity, and the continuing presence of love that death cannot diminish. Sometimes the best service I can provide is preparing for farewells that no one has planned but everyone needs. Some burdens become heavier after death, until the flames finally set them free. I'm Kevin, and I've been crematory assistant at Valley Memorial for 6 years. Part of my job involves weighing the deceased before cremation standard procedure for documentation, fuel calculation, and ensuring our equipment operates safely. The digital scale is precise, consistent, reliable. Bodies don't gain weight after death. That's basic biology. Decomposition, dehydration, natural processes, everything trends toward weight loss. The scale readings should decrease over time, not increase. But some bodies seem to be carrying more than flesh and bone. The first time I noticed, it was Mrs. Catherine Wells, elderly woman who'd passed from natural causes. When she arrived from the funeral home, she weighed 137 pounds, standard weight for her age and build, consistent with the intake documentation. 3 days later, before cremation, she weighed 189 pounds, 52 pounds heavier. Impossible gain, especially for someone who'd been properly refrigerated and hadn't decomposed abnormally. I checked the scale calibration, tested it with known weights, ran full diagnostics. The equipment was working perfectly. Mrs. Wells had somehow gained over 50 pounds while dead. I mentioned it to Linda, our supervisor. Scale malfunction, she said. Even the best equipment can develop errors. Note the discrepancy and use the original intake weight for documentation. But I'd tested the scale thoroughly. It was accurate for everything else, other bodies, test weights, calibration standards. Only Mrs. Wells showed the impossible reading. I weighed her again an hour before cremation. 194 pounds. Still gaining weight, even in death. The cremation proceeded normally. Standard temperature, normal duration, proper ash production. When we weighed the cremated remains, they were exactly what we'd expect from a 137-pound person. The extra weight had vanished completely in the flames. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Mr. Frank Rodriguez, heart attack victim, arrived weighing 163 pounds. By cremation day, he weighed 218 pounds, 55 pounds heavier, despite being dead for a week. I started documenting every anomalous weight gain, looking for patterns. Roughly 1 in 4 bodies showed significant increases, anywhere from 30 to 80 pounds gained during storage. Age, gender, cause of death didn't seem to matter. The weight gain was random, unexplained, but consistent for certain individuals. The extra weight always disappeared during cremation, leaving normal ash quantities. 3 months later, I decided to research the people who gained weight after death. Mrs. Catherine Wells had died owing over $40,000 in credit card debt. Her family discovered after her death that she'd been struggling financially for years, borrowing money to maintain appearances, hiding bills from her adult children. Mr. Frank Rodriguez had left behind a secret drinking problem his family never knew about. His wife found hidden bottles throughout their house, evidence of years of concealed addiction. Mrs. Dorothy Kim had been carrying on an affair for 20 years, leaving behind letters and photographs her husband discovered while settling her estate. Every person who gained weight after death had died with significant secrets, hidden burdens, unresolved guilt. The weight increase seemed proportional to the emotional weight they'd carried in life. But the living members of their families had no idea about these hidden burdens. The secrets died with the deceased, leaving loved ones to discover painful truths during estate settlement and personal effects review. That's when I started paying attention to the families during cremation services. Mrs. Helen Torres gained 63 pounds after death. Her daughter attended the cremation ceremony, standing quietly while we conducted the service. During the process, Helen's daughter received a phone call from a lawyer about debts she'd never known existed. "Mom was always so proud," her daughter said afterward. "She never would have wanted us to know she was struggling." The cremation completed normally. Helen's ashes weighed exactly what we'd expect from her original living weight. The 63 pounds of hidden debt and shame had burned away with her body. Mr. David Chen gained 47 pounds after death. His son discovered hidden gambling debts, secret accounts, evidence of problems David had concealed for decades. During the cremation, David's weight gradually decreased from 212 pounds to his original 165 pounds as the flames consumed both his body and his secrets. I began to understand that the weight gain represented emotional burdens the deceased had carried alone. Shame, guilt, fear, regret, invisible loads that somehow became measurable after death. The cremation process wasn't just destroying physical remains. It was burning away the psychological weight that had burdened these souls, freeing them from secrets they'd carried in silence. Last year, Mrs. Joyce Martinez arrived weighing 141 pounds. By cremation day, she weighed 237 pounds, 96 pounds of additional weight, the largest increase I documented. Her family attended the cremation service, expecting a routine ceremony. During the process, Joyce's adult daughter found a hidden letter in her mother's purse. "I'm sorry for everything I couldn't tell you," the letter began. "The money I borrowed, the mistakes I made, the pain I caused your father. I hope cremation will burn away my shame so you can remember me with love instead of disappointment." The letter detailed decades of hidden financial problems, secret debts, lies told to protect her family from worry. Joyce had carried enormous guilt about these deceptions, weighing down her final years with shame and fear of discovery. As the cremation progressed, I watched the scale readings decrease in real time. The invisible weight of Joyce's guilt was burning away, along with her physical form. By the end of the process, her ashes weighed exactly what they should for her original living weight. Her daughter held the letter and cried, but not from anger or disappointment. "She was protecting us," she said. "Even her secrets were acts of love." Now I understand that the crematory scale measures more than physical weight. It documents the invisible burdens people carry: shame, guilt, unspoken truths, hidden pain. These emotional loads somehow become tangible after death, adding measurable weight to the body. But cremation burns away more than flesh and bone. The flames consume the psychological burdens that weighed down these souls, freeing them from secrets they couldn't release in life. The ashes I return to families are lighter in every sense, freed from both physical form and emotional weight, purified by fire that burns away everything except love. Every time I see impossible weight gain on the scale, I know I'm measuring a soul that carried hidden burdens. And every time those pounds disappear in the flames, I know I'm witnessing liberation, the final release of shame and guilt and fear. The crematory doesn't just return ashes to families. It returns souls freed from the weights they carried alone, finally light enough to find peace. Night security cameras record more than what the living eyes can see. I'm Tom, and I've been night security guard at Restful Peace Funeral Home for 5 years. It's quiet work, monitoring the building, ensuring everything stays secure, watching for problems that might disturb the peace. The surveillance system covers every room, every hallway, every entrance. Nothing happens here without being recorded. The cameras never lie. Digital footage, timestamp accurate, high resolution. Whatever happens in this building gets documented, stored, archived. Professional security reliable technology, complete coverage. That's what made the midnight footage so unsettling. The first time I noticed, it was during routine review of the previous night's recordings. Standard procedure: scan through the footage, make sure nothing unusual happened, file the report for insurance purposes. The prep room cameras showed normal activity from midnight to dawn, staff working regular shifts, following standard procedures, maintaining proper protocols. Ben the embalmer, Rosa the assistant, Linda the supervisor, all working their usual routines. But according to the duty logs, the building had been empty from midnight to 6 a.m. I checked the timestamps carefully. The footage was dated correctly, time-coded accurately. The cameras showed 3 people working normal shifts in the prep rooms between midnight and dawn. Professional, efficient, respectful work embalming, preparation, documentation. But the building had been locked and empty. No staff scheduled, no overtime approved, no legitimate reason for anyone to be working. I reviewed the entry logs. No key card access recorded after 11 p.m., no alarms triggered, no security breaches detected. The building showed no signs of unauthorized entry. Yet the cameras clearly showed staff working full shifts during hours when no one should have been present. I mentioned it to Director Wilson when he arrived in the morning. "Equipment malfunction," he said. "Sometimes security systems can replay old footage, make it look like current activity. I'll have IT check the system." It found nothing wrong. The surveillance equipment was functioning perfectly, recording accurately, storing data correctly. The midnight footage was genuine, not replayed or corrupted data. "Maybe you missed something in the duty logs," Wilson suggested. "Check with the staff directly." I asked Ben, Rosa, and Linda about working midnight shifts. All 3 looked confused. "I've never worked nights here," Ben said. "My shift ends at 6 p.m. Why would I be here at midnight?" Rosa and Linda gave similar responses. None of them had any memory of working overnight shifts. None had been asked to work extra hours. But the cameras showed them clearly: same faces, same uniforms, same professional demeanor, working efficiently through the night, caring for the deceased with their usual skill and respect. The next night, I decided to observe in real time. I positioned myself in the security office with direct views of both the prep rooms and the surveillance monitors. If staff were somehow entering the building without triggering alarms, I'd see them directly. If the cameras were malfunctioning, I'd spot the discrepancy immediately. At midnight exactly, the prep room lights activated on their own. I could see the room clearly through the office window: empty, dark, no signs of activity. But the surveillance monitors showed Ben entering the prep room, turning on equipment, beginning his normal embalming procedures. The monitors displayed detailed footage of Ben working on Mrs. Dorothy Martinez, who was scheduled for services later that week. Professional, methodical, respectful work. I could see him adjusting the body's position, preparing embalming solutions, following standard protocols. But when I looked directly into the prep room, it was empty and dark. I walked to the prep room to investigate. The door was locked, the lights were off, no equipment was running. Mrs. Martinez was in her storage unit, undisturbed, exactly as she'd been left at closing time. When I returned to the security office, the monitors showed me entering the prep room, checking on the work, having a conversation with Ben about proper procedures. The cameras recorded me working alongside people who weren't there. I watched for 6 hours as the surveillance system documented a full night shift. Ben completing embalming procedures, Rosa organizing supplies, Linda conducting quality checks. All 3 staff members working their normal routines, following standard procedures, maintaining the high professional standards restful peace was known for. But I was alone in an empty building, watching security monitors that showed impossible activity. The next morning, I checked on Mrs. Martinez. She'd been fully embalmed, professionally prepared, ready for her scheduled service. The work was perfect: Ben's usual quality, attention to detail, respectful presentation, Someone had completed the embalming process during the night, but Ben had been home asleep, 30 miles away. I started researching the history of Restful Peace Funeral Home. The building had been operating as a funeral home since 1952. 3 generations of the same family had run the business, building a reputation for exceptional care and professional service. The current staff, Ben, Rosa, Linda, had worked there for decades, learning their skills from previous generations. But in 1997, there'd been a fire. Electrical malfunction in the prep room. Late at night, when the building should have been empty, 3 staff members had died in the blaze. Harold, the embalmer, Margaret, the assistant, Patricia, the supervisor. They'd been working an emergency overnight shift, preparing a body for an unexpected service. The fire had destroyed the old prep room and killed 3 dedicated employees who'd stayed late to serve a grieving family. The new prep room had been built in the same location. Ben, Rosa, and Linda had been hired to replace the employees who died in the fire. When I compared the surveillance footage to old employee photographs, the truth became clear. The midnight workers weren't Ben, Rosa, and Linda. They were Harold, Margaret, and Patricia, the employees who died in 1997, still working their shifts, still caring for the deceased, still maintaining the professional standards they'd upheld in life. But they looked exactly like the current staff. Same faces, same mannerisms, same professional competence, as if the roles themselves had taken on permanent form, independent of the people who filled them. The next night, I stayed in the security office and spoke to the cameras. "Harold?" I said to the prep room monitor. "Margaret? Patricia?" The figure that looked like Ben paused in his work and looked directly at the camera. For just a moment, his face flickered Ben's features, overlaid with those of an older man, Harold's kind eyes looking out through Ben's face. "Thank you for watching," he said, his voice reaching me through the intercom system. "It's important that someone witness, that someone ensures the work continues properly." "Why do you stay?" I asked. "Unfinished business," said the figure that looked like Linda but was really Patricia. "We died before completing our duties. The families trusted us, and we couldn't let them down. But new staff have taken over. Ben, Rosa, Linda, they do excellent work." "We know," said the figure that looked like Rosa but was really Margaret. "We train them. We guide them. We ensure the standards remain high. But some responsibilities transcend individual employees." Over the following months, I learned to recognize the subtle differences. During the day, Ben, Rosa, and Linda worked their normal shifts, living people doing excellent work, caring for families, and honoring the deceased. But at night, Harold, Margaret, and Patricia continued their eternal shifts, working through the current staff's appearance, ensuring that every service met the standards they died trying to maintain. The midnight footage showed both realities, the dedicated dead continuing their work, and the living staff, whose hands and skills they guided. A seamless collaboration between past and present, ensuring that Restful Peace's reputation for exceptional care continued across generations. I stopped questioning the impossible surveillance footage. Instead, I documented it carefully, maintaining security records that honored both the living staff and the dead employees who refused to abandon their posts. Because some jobs are too important to end with death. Some commitments transcend individual lifetimes. And sometimes, the best way to honor the dead is to let them continue serving the living, even if only the cameras can see them clearly. The midnight shift at Restful Peace never ends. It just changes form, passing from one generation to the next, guided by souls too dedicated to let death interrupt their service to grieving families. And every night the cameras record the truth, that the living eyes can't see that love and duty and professional pride create bonds stronger than life and death. Some gratitude arrives years after the service ends, from families who remember ceremonies that never happened. I'm Rachel, and I've been funeral coordinator at Evergreen Memorial Chapel for 13 years. My job involves planning services, coordinating with families, ensuring every detail honors the deceased properly. I maintain detailed records of every arrangement: flowers, music, speakers, special requests, professional documentation, complete files, perfect service histories. But sometimes, families remember services that aren't in my records. The first call came on a Thursday afternoon in November. "This is Mrs. Patricia Chen," the caller said. "I wanted to thank you for the beautiful service you arranged for my mother last year." I pulled up our files, searching for Chen family services from the previous 12 months. No matches in our system. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but I don't have any record of services for your family. Could you provide your mother's name and the approximate date?" "Dorothy Chen," she said. "The service was in March. You remember the white roses, the piano music, the lovely eulogy her granddaughter gave? Everything was perfect." I searched again, checking alternative spellings, different date ranges, even archived files from previous years. No Dorothy Chen. No Chen family services. No record of any arrangements matching her description. "Mrs. Chen, I'm not finding any documentation. Are you certain the service was held at Evergreen Memorial?" "Of course I'm certain," she said, sounding confused. "You coordinated everything personally. The flowers were exactly what Mother would have wanted. White roses with baby's breath, arranged in a heart shape. The pianist played her favorite hymn, 'How Great Thou Art.' My daughter Sarah spoke beautifully about grandmother's love of gardening. She described the service in perfect detail. Specific flowers, particular music, personal touches that sounded exactly like arrangements I would make. Professional, thoughtful, personalized, to honor Dorothy Chen's memory. But I'd never met Mrs. Chen, never arranged services for her mother, never coordinated any of the elements she described. "Mrs. Chen," I said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion about which funeral home handled your mother's service." "No confusion," she said firmly. "Evergreen Memorial Chapel, March 15th. You wore a navy dress, and you personally ensured the flowers were positioned correctly. You even stayed late to help with the reception setup. The details were too specific, too personal." Mrs. Chen wasn't confused or mistaken. She was describing a real service, real arrangements, real interactions with me. But none of it had happened. 3 weeks later, another call. "This is David Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you for the memorial service you arranged for my father 6 months ago." Same pattern, detailed description of a service that wasn't in our records. Specific flowers, particular music, personal touches that sounded exactly like my work. David Rodriguez remembered conversations with me about his father's military service, the flag ceremony we'd arranged, the Veterans Honor Guard I'd coordinated. "The 21-gun salute was perfect," he said. "Dad would have been so proud. And the way you handled the flag presentation to my mother, so respectful, so dignified, exactly what our family needed." I'd never met David Rodriguez. His father's service wasn't in our files. I'd never arranged a military honor guard or coordinated a flag ceremony for anyone named Rodriguez. But David's gratitude was genuine. His memories of the service vivid and detailed. Over the following months, I received dozens of similar calls. Families thanking me for services that weren't documented, describing arrangements that sounded exactly like my work but had never happened. Each caller provided specific details, flower types, music selections, personal touches that demonstrated intimate knowledge of the deceased. They remembered conversations with me about family history, special requests, modifications to standard procedures. The services they described were exactly the kind of ceremonies I would arrange: thoughtful, personalized, respectful of both the deceased and the grieving families. But none of them existed in our records. I started keeping a separate log of these calls, documenting the services that families remembered, but I'd never arranged. The pattern became clear. Every caller described losing someone they'd loved deeply, someone whose death had left them feeling lost and unprepared. Mrs. Chen's mother, Dorothy, had died suddenly, leaving Patricia without time to plan a proper farewell. David Rodriguez's father had died alone, far from family, with no one to coordinate appropriate military honors. Margaret Santos's husband had died during a pandemic, when gathering restrictions prevented the memorial service he deserved. Each family had been denied the opportunity to honor their loved ones properly. Death had come too quickly. Circumstances had prevented proper ceremonies, or practical limitations had made meaningful services impossible. But they all remembered receiving exactly the kind of service their loved ones deserved. 6 months ago, I received a call that changed my understanding completely. "This is Eleanor Morrison," the caller said. "I wanted to thank you again for the beautiful service you arranged for my daughter Jennifer. It's been 2 years, but I still think about how perfect everything was." Jennifer Morrison. I recognized the name immediately, not from our service records, but from local news coverage. 23-year-old teacher died in a car accident. Family devastated by the sudden loss. Jennifer Morrison's actual service had been held at a different funeral home. Simple ceremony, limited attendance due to COVID restrictions, no personalization or special touches. Her mother had been quoted in the newspaper expressing regret that they couldn't give Jennifer the celebration of life she deserved. "Eleanor," I said gently, "tell me about the service you remember." "Oh, it was perfect," she said. "You understood exactly what Jennifer would have wanted. The sunflowers, her favorite flowers arranged in bright, cheerful displays. The slideshow of her teaching photos, the children's choir singing, 'You Are My Sunshine.' Her favorite song. All her students came, even the ones from previous years. The whole community was there." Eleanor described a memorial service that honored Jennifer completely. Personal touches that reflected her love of teaching. Music that captured her joyful spirit. Attendance that demonstrated her impact on others' lives. "You even arranged for her students to release butterflies at the end," Eleanor continued. "Jennifer loved butterflies. She had them all over her classroom. When those butterflies flew up into the sky, it felt like Jennifer was flying free too." I listened as Eleanor described the service Jennifer deserved, but never received. Full of love, celebration, community support, personal meaning. "Eleanor," I said, "do you think Jennifer knew how much she was loved?" "Oh yes," Eleanor said immediately. "The service made that clear. Seeing all those people, hearing all those stories about how she'd touched their lives, Jennifer definitely knew she was loved." That's when I understood what was happening. These families weren't confused or mistaken. They were receiving the services their loved ones deserved, even when circumstances had prevented proper ceremonies in life. Somewhere, somehow, the perfect farewells were taking place, complete with personal touches, meaningful details, and the love that death had interrupted. My role wasn't just coordinating actual services. I was also arranging the memorial ceremonies that existed in the space between grief and healing, providing the farewells that families needed to find peace. I stopped questioning the calls. Instead, I listened carefully as families described the perfect services they remembered, grateful that their loved ones had somehow received the honor and celebration they deserved. Because maybe death doesn't end the opportunity for proper farewells. Maybe love creates its own ceremonies, complete with flowers and music and community support, even when the living world can't provide them. And maybe the most important services are the ones that happen in the hearts of the grieving, where perfect farewells become real through the power of love and the need to honor those we've lost. The calls keep coming, families thanking me for services that exist somewhere beyond our documentation, ceremonies that provide the closure that death had denied. And every time I hear the gratitude in their voices, I know that love finds a way to create the farewells it needs, even when the world can't provide them.